Today we will learn and reflect on the teachings of Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a true philosopher king in the words of Plato, in his work, The Meditations. These were written in his tent while he was on campaign fighting the Germanic tribes. The Meditations was not meant for wide distribution. Perhaps he hoped he would pass this advice on to his son and future Emperor Commodus, but sadly Commodus was not interested in leading a Stoic lifestyle and being a good emperor. He preferred to compete in the arena with gladiators. Now you may ask, how will studying the Meditations improve my soul? Living a godly and moral life is all that mattered to the Stoic philosophers. Now the paradox is that although Marcus Aurelius may have condoned the persecution of Christians, in this work he often sounds like he's rephrasing the moral teachings of the epistles and the Gospels. In part, this is because he borrowed so much of his teachings from the earlier Stoic philosophers Epictetus and probably also Seneca, and they also sounded very similar to the teachings of the epistles and the Gospels. We have another video that ponders whether Marcus Aurelius was a persecutor or friend of Christians. That link will be in the end of the video. At the end of our talk, we will discuss the sources we use for this videos and my blogs, which also cover this topic. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Sometimes these generate short videos of their own. Let us learn and reflect together. The Meditations were only mentioned a few times in the ancient sources, with the earliest mention in modern times in the 10th century. We have 3 full ancient manuscripts, the source for today's translation of the Meditations. In the first book, Marcus praises his parents and grandparents, his tutors, the philosophers, and his adopted emperor father and all his friends and associates for their Stoic qualities, showing his gratefulness, thankfulness, and humility, crediting his own good qualities not to his own intellect, but those who so assiduously taught him through words and by example. By listing their Stoic qualities, Marcus is also telling us the qualities that we should aspire to in our daily lives. Some of the quotes by Marcus Aurelius in the Meditations. We are the guardians of our thoughts and emotions. We are responsible for our happiness and nobody else. And a direct quote, Marcus Aurelius advises us in Book 2 to begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the deceitful, the envious, the unsocial. All these things happen to them because they are ignorant of what is good and evil. I can neither be injured by any of these, for no one can fix on me what is ugly, nor can I be angry with my kinsman, nor hate him. Marcus Aurelius continues, every moment think steadily as a Roman to do what you need to do with perfect and simple dignity, and feeling of affection, and freedom and justice, lifting the weight of all other thoughts from your shoulders. How can you do this? By living every day of your life as if it were your last, living your life by rules of reason, laying aside all carelessness, hypocrisy, self-love, being content with what you have. Since it is possible that you might depart from life this very moment, regulate every act and thought accordingly. Marcus Aurelius and many Stoics never ask why bad things happen to good people. Rather, they note that bad things happen to both good people and bad, and good things also happen to both bad and good people. And so the real question is, so what? And we have a direct quote from Marcus Aurelius. Good and evil happen indiscriminately to the good and the bad. Death and life, honor and dishonor, pain and pleasure, all these things happen equally to good men and to bad men, being things which make us neither better nor worse. Therefore, they are neither good nor evil. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you every day. While you live, while it is in your power, live a godly life. Take away the complaint, I have been harmed, and the harm is taken away. The Meditations admonish us to take care of our soul, so our soul may be a good soul, a kind soul, a virtuous soul. We do not want our soul to be an abscess on the universe. The soul should not be angry at anything that happens. The soul does violence to itself when it turns away from any man, when it thinks of injuring any man. The soul does violence to itself when it is overpowered by pleasure or by pain. The soul shall not say anything insincerely or untruthfully. Now, both the Meditations and the Beatitudes encourage us to live our lives like the sturdy house that is built on the rocks. And the Meditations counsel us to be like the rocks against the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the waters around it. Do not say, I am unhappy because this has happened to me, but rather say, I am happy although this has happened to me, because I continue free from pain, neither crushed by the present nor fearing the future. This echoes the words of Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them shall be like a wise man who builds his house upon the rock. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Since we are comparing the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, who is perhaps a persecutor of Christians, to the preachings of Jesus, we should emphasize that we don't want to imply that these teachings are equal. Now, logically speaking, Christianity as a philosophy is superior to Stoicism, because Stoicism is only a secondary influence to Christianity. The primary influence on Christianity is Judaism and its rabbinic tradition. Now, spiritually speaking, Christianity is also far superior, as this quote by Henry Chadwick in his early church history emphasizes. The Christians found much that was congenial in Stoic ethics and did not deny their debt to Stoic wisdom. For example, Tertullian said that Seneca often speaks like a Christian. The difference is that Christianity stresses the grace of God that makes Christian life possible. Also, the love of God rather than the individual self-respect is the object towards which human striving should be directed. Both emphasize the outgoing charity towards one's fellow man. Now, there are many passages in the Stoic philosophers that suggest that we should love God very directly, but they perhaps are referring more to the distant Platonic God who creates impassively through the emanations, which may resemble the later Neoplatonist God of Plotinus. What does Chadwick mean when he implies that Stoicism is centered around the individual's self-respect? Perhaps this is not the best choice of words, but he may be saying that Stoicism emphasizes how you should possess strength of character and high personal integrity. Returning to Marcus Aurelius in the Meditations, he admonishes, remember when you are vexed, when you face life's frustrations, to apply this principle, that your trials are not misfortunes, but that to nobly bear what life throws at you is good fortune indeed. Stoics love their lists of virtues and vices, and this is from Marcus Aurelius. Show those qualities that are altogether in your power: sincerity, gravity, endurance of labor, aversion to pleasure, contentment with what you have and with a simple life, benevolence, frankness, no love of frills, freedom from trifling, magnanimity. Stoics and the Eastern Church Fathers remind us of the importance of daily cultivating good habits. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, your habitual thoughts will determine the character of your mind, for the soul is dyed by your thoughts. This echoes St. Paul in 1 Corinthians. We destroy arguments and every proud obstacle to the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. The Gospels and Epistles exhort us not only to love our friends but also our enemies, and to love even those who spitefully use us. Likewise, Marcus Aurelius observes, it is peculiar to man to love even those who do us wrong, for the wrongdoers are fellow humans who do wrong through ignorance, often unintentionally, and like us, they will also soon die. Above all, the wrongdoer has done you no harm, for he cannot steal from you your virtue and goodness. Marcus Aurelius continues, it is your duty to pardon those who wrong you, for they may be mistaken. They may be deluded into thinking that they have actually done what is right. Confine yourself to the present. Think of your last hour. Let the wrong that is done by a man stay there where the wrong was done. Whenever someone tries to harm us, they're often responding not to us, but someone who has harmed them many years back, or perhaps someone who has damaged their parent's soul many decades ago. We are just collateral damage. We can find it easier to forgive their wrongs and shortcomings if we're able to learn what cruel wrong or injustice in their past had damaged their souls. Marcus Aurelius counsels us not to bear grudges. When another blames you or hates you, or when men say anything injurious about you, approach their poor souls and penetrate within and see what kind of men they are. You will discover that there is no reason to be concerned that these men have this or that opinion about you. However, you must be welcoming to them, for they are your friends. And God, too, aids them in all ways, by dreams, by signs, toward the attainment of those things on which they set a value. If any man has done wrong, he harms himself, but perhaps he has not done wrong. This compares to the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. So men persecuted the prophets who were before you. And Marcus Aurelius begins Book 9 with his observation that injustice is impiety. Since universal nature has made rational animals to help one another rather than to attack each other, he who transgresses her will is clearly guilty of impiety towards the highest divinity. And he who lies is also guilty of impiety towards the highest divinity. He who lies intentionally is guilty of impiety, inasmuch as he acts unjustly by deceiving. In other words, when we sin against our neighbor, we sin against our God. Marcus Aurelius in Book 11 celebrates the rational soul that separates mankind from the beasts, the rational soul that sees itself, analyzes itself, improves itself as it chooses, reaping its own fruits, in contrast to the fruits of the field that are reaped by men and beasts who are incapable of moral improvement. This is a property of the rational soul, love of one's neighbor, and truth and modesty. Marcus Aurelius further proposes, suppose any man shall despise me, let him worry about that. But my concern is rather that I do not or say anything in response that is contemptible. Shall any man hate me? That shall be his affair. But I will be mild and benevolent towards every man, and ready to show even him his mistake, not reproachfully, but not yet as making a display of my endurance, but nobly and honestly. So we must always examine our motives. Not only should we love our enemies and forgive our enemies, but our love should be genuine, and we should be eager to forgive. And if we should publicly correct or forgive our enemies, we should do this in a loving manner, with good motives. Marcus Aurelius tells us we should always remember that if men do not do right, we should assume that they do so involuntarily and in ignorance. For as every soul is unwillingly deprived of the truth, so also is it unwillingly deprived of the power to behave as it should. We should consider that we also do many things wrong, that we are merely men, that even when we refrain from certain faults, we still have the disposition to commit them, either through cowardice, concern about reputation, or some other mean motive. We should consider that we do not even understand whether men are doing wrong or not, for many things are done according to circumstances. Men must know a great deal to pass correct judgment on each other's acts. We should consider that it is not men's acts that disturb us, but it is our own opinions that disturb us. Take away these opinions, set aside your judgment, and your anger will disappear. But how shall we take away these opinions? By reflecting that no wrongful act of another brings shame on you. We should consider how much more pain is brought upon us by our anger and vexation of our neighbor's acts than those acts themselves. And these meditations reminds me of a Dear Ann Landers letter I read many years ago. The letter starts, Dear Ann Landers, I want to share a recent discovery that has made me a better person. I used to assume that a wealthy woman I knew slightly was an arrogant snob because she rarely spoke and never smiled. I also had the notion that the women in the supermarket with the whining children were lousy mothers. Then one day, as I stood in line at the grocery store, I noticed that the clerk never smiled at the customers It ignored polite conversation. I was tempted to tell her what I thought of her sour attitude when the elderly women in front of me took a different approach. She said, "Honey, you look like you're having a bad day." The clerk looked up at her with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen and said, "My husband lost his job yesterday and I just found out I'm pregnant." The lady patted her hand and said, "Dear, my dear, my dear, things will work out." When it was my turn, the clerk had tears in her eyes but smiled, so I felt ashamed of myself for being so intolerant. The incident made me realize that people aren't rude because they are mean and want to make my life miserable. They're unpleasant because they have problems on their mind and a heavy heart. My entire outlook on life changed that day, and now I'm much more compassionate. The change in attitude has made those around me happier, but the greatest benefit is mine. I'm less angry and more serene and like myself better than I used to. Signed, Older and Wiser in West Virginia. So, the next time you go to a restaurant, if you want to live like a true Stoic, if the waitress seems distracted and provides you poor service, tip her anyway, for God's already punishing her. She's a waitress, and you know for sure she's not making much money at all. Marcus Aurelius, likewise, tells us we should consider that a good disposition is invincible, if it is genuine and not an affected smile acting the part. If we are kind and gentle and truly empathetic, we can sometimes admonish our enemies with tact, even as they are trying to do us harm. But we are warned we cannot do this in irony or rebuke, but with kindly affection and without any bitterness of heart, not as from a master's chair, and yet to impress the bystanders, but as if he were indeed alone, even though others are present. Marcus Aurelius tells us how true men respond to those who offend them. True men who have strength and nerves and courage. True men who are not subject to fits of passion or discontent. He urges us to remember these rules as if you had received them as a gift from the muses, and begin at last to be a man while you live. You must equally avoid flattering men and being vexed by them, for both are antisocial and harmful. Remember this when your anger flares, that it is not manly to be moved by passion, but rather true men are moved by mildness and gentleness. Marcus Aurelius observes, God sees into the minds and hearts of all men, bared naked of vestments and rinds and impurities. Also, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Do not even think that which is not true. Does the light of the lamp shine without losing its splendor until it is extinguished? And shall the truth that is in you in justice and temperance be extinguished before your death? As Winston Churchill so aptly put it when he described the fight against the evil of Nazi Germany, never, never, never give up on the fight against evil or the fight for right. Now we will discuss some of the sources I used for this video. We have the Dover Thrift Edition from Amazon. I found the translation in the Stoic 6-pack of the Meditations to be undecipherable. Marcus Aurelius is quite readable. You should purchase this book and read it for yourself. The Meditations can also be downloaded for free in many places on the internet. And also, I ran into a copy of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, annotated and explained with a great introduction and comments on how you can apply the teachings of Marcus Aurelius to their daily life. This is good. I first learned of the Stoic philosophers from a series of teaching company lectures on Greek moral philosophers by Professor Timothy Luke Johnson. This series of lectures deeply affected me and is one of my favorites. Likewise, the Stoic philosophers are greatly treasured by Professor Johnson. He had by chance picked up a used book containing the writings of Epictetus and was deeply influenced by his teachings. It is puzzling why the Stoic philosophers are so often neglected by modern scholars. They were far more highly prized in antiquity and by the early Christians and church fathers. Please click on the links in the description for our blogs on Marcus Aurelius, and also on the links for our YouTube videos on the other Stoic philosophers, and other interesting videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul. Thank you.